Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you are well. My name is Santiago, and today I want to share with you, with great respect and with my father's permission, this story that happened to him and his sister when they were young. I repeat, I do this with all due respect because it is a sensitive topic that still pains him, but the story is so impactful that it is worth sharing. When he was 20 years old, my father bought a motorcycle and learned to ride it, as it had always been his dream to have one. His uncle had one and taught him how to ride it since he was 17, so he saved up to buy his own. It was always his means of transportation, but after what happened, he has never ridden one again and doesn't even want to see them. To give you the context of this story and how it all began, I must start by telling you about my aunt, my father's sister. He says she was always a very sensitive person. She was the youngest of 4 siblings and the only girl. He says that since she was little, she had an imaginary friend. She always talked to him and sometimes scared the family because it really seemed like she was with someone when no one else was around. He also told me that she could detect bad people the moment she met them, and that she was almost never wrong. She simply had a very well-developed sixth sense. She could feel or see things that the average person couldn't. When she was 18 and my father was 28, he no longer lived with my grandparents, nor did any of their siblings, only my aunt. One day, my grandmother called my father to tell him she was very worried about my aunt. Every day when she came back from university, she said something was following her, like she was being watched. She said it was coming for her and would become very hysterical, crying and screaming. Sometimes in the middle of the night she would start shouting that it couldn't take her and saying things my grandparents couldn't understand. She stopped going to university because she said that when she left at night, a faceless woman would follow her back home. She described this woman as very elusive. Sometimes she would be many meters away, but when she turned around, the woman would be just a few steps behind her. My grandparents called my father because they didn't believe anything my aunt said. They thought she had some mental condition and asked for his help. My father lived in the capital and was doing very well financially. They wanted him to come for his sister to take her to a good psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever would be best for her. Being the eldest brother and the most successful, he agreed to what my grandparents were asking. Although he says that deep down he believed his sister because, as I mentioned, she had been very susceptible to all those things since childhood. He knew she could see or feel things we couldn't. But he wanted to please my grandparents and of course help his sister. So my father took some days off work and went for her on his motorcycle. They lived in Puebla, so it wasn't far from the capital. He arrived at their house and convinced her that it was best for her to get help, to let him help her. Since they got along very well, my father managed to convince her, and it's something he still regrets. They left in the afternoon, and it got dark on the road. My father says that at first, his sister was calm, but when the sun began to set, she started to lose control. She began to say things like she knew she wouldn't make it through the night, that she felt that woman very close, and that she was coming for her. My father couldn't keep riding like that, so he decided to stop at a gas station to buy some food and calm her down, as she was making him very nervous. He says she seemed disconnected from the world, with a lost look full of anguish and not faking anything. Everything she said she felt was real, and could be seen in her face. Despite my father's comforting words, trying to calm her down, she wouldn't stop crying. After a while, they got back on the motorcycle, with just a little way left to reach the city. But his sister began to cry and scream, saying that thing was already behind them, chasing them, begging him to accelerate or it would catch them. My father says he looked in the side mirror and saw a dark silhouette with an extremely white face and deep, dark eye sockets running at an impressive speed just a few meters behind them. My father almost lost control, and my aunt kept crying without saying anything else, just crying nonstop and hugging my father with her head on his back. My father looked again to see if what he saw in the mirror was real, and says he didn't see anything anymore. But when he turned forward, There was a tire lying a few meters ahead and he couldn't stop or avoid it. They were both thrown off the motorcycle. My father ended up with a broken leg, but my aunt lost her life instantly. He says those were the worst moments of his life. He wanted to go to where my aunt had fallen to see if she was okay, but he couldn't move because of his leg. A car passing by saw them and stopped to help, calling for emergency services, but it was too late. She had already passed away. To this day, my father continues to blame himself wrongly, but he says he knows perfectly well what he saw. My aunt wasn't crazy or hallucinating, and he made sure to tell everyone that his sister was telling the truth, that there was indeed something. What she had been seeing all that time was death, and she knew it would come for her soon, which is why she had started acting that way. I never met her, but I only hope she is in a better place, resting. I have to say that I do believe everything she saw before passing away, and I also believe my father about that thing he saw in the darkness of that road, chasing them. I can't imagine the terror he felt, but not more than what he felt after what happened. When someone tells you they have a bad feeling, don't ignore them. Ever since my father told me this, I always listened to my intuition, and thanks to that I have avoided many situations where my life could have been in danger. We do not know the potential of the human mind. How's it going, community? My name is Patricio, but my friend Hugo calls me Pat. Hugo and I want to share with you a story that we consider entirely paranormal. Many of our friends don't believe us, but it's real, even though we wish it weren't. It happened about a year ago. My friend Hugo has a motorcycle and has been riding it since I've known him. He's an excellent motorcyclist and travels to many places in the country on it. In fact, he says he prefers motorcycles 1,000 times more than cars. Anyway, one day he called me to invite me to a concert by one of our favorite rock bands in a city about 3 hours away from ours. He told me not to worry about accommodation because we could go and come back the same night on his bike, and we would only spend money on the concert tickets and what we consumed there. Of course I said yes. I was very excited to go to that concert. The day arrived and we left on his bike. The trip there was fine. We traveled during the day and arrived in time to get a good spot at the front. The problem was the return trip. We left the concert around 3 in the morning. Hugo was completely sober, of course, since he was the one driving. I had had a few beers, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was also fully aware because it wouldn't be very smart to drink too much and then ride a motorcycle home. We were already on the road when suddenly we saw someone in the distance walking towards us. He was walking alone along the side of the road. I joked to Hugo, "Look, a ghost has appeared." We both laughed, and he told me he was going to pull over. I responded that he was crazy, but he didn't care that I told him not to. He still started to slow down, and as we got closer, we noticed it was an elderly man wearing a hospital gown and barefoot. I told Hugo, "Let's get out of here, this is no longer a joke." But he stopped next to the man and shouted, "Good evening, do you need help?" The man kept walking without even looking at us. It was as if he couldn't see us, or at least that's what it seemed like because he didn't even glance our way. The man had already passed us and kept walking straight, and Hugo kept shouting, asking where he was going and if he needed anything. But the man never turned around and kept walking until we lost sight of him. Hugo wanted to go after him, but I told him to calm down, that we didn't even know who he was, and that it was very late. It could be dangerous. Besides, from the moment I saw him, I felt something wasn't right. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. Hugo listened to me and finally moved on. But about half a kilometer ahead, we encountered something that almost made us lose control. There was an overturned ambulance on the side of the road. We saw 2 people on the ground and the driver still inside the ambulance, restrained by his seatbelt. My friend and I were in shock, but the most terrifying part was when Hugo asked me, "Pat, isn't that the man we saw?" pointing ahead. I replied, "Yes." The man was lying on the side of the road, his body sprawled out, motionless. At that moment, we saw several ambulances and a patrol car arriving. It seemed someone had already reported the accident, and they told us to move along. We managed to overhear the paramedics saying that the 3 bodies on the ground had no life left in them. My friend and I started crying. We had never seen dead people before, let alone a spirit. When we finally got to my house, Hugo stayed with me that night, but we couldn't sleep. We kept talking and going over what had happened. We wanted to find an explanation, but there wasn't one. We don't know where that man's soul was going. Maybe he was simply lost and didn't know where to go. This happened just a year ago, and although some time has passed, that scene still lingers in my mind. It's something you're never prepared to see, and unfortunately my friend and I experienced it. I just hope that man is now resting in peace. I would feel terrible if he were still lost on that road, searching for his way home. Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good day or night. My name is Daniel. I am 24 years old and have been a motorcyclist since I was 18. I always travel from Ciudad Victoria to visit my parents on my motorcycle because I have been living here with my partner for a few years now. I almost always travel alone since I don't like to risk my girlfriend because the roads have become dangerous due to crime. I usually travel at night because that's when I enjoy it the most. The silhouettes of the mountains around me in the darkness are imposing, but it's something I really like to admire. Before this, I had never experienced anything paranormal on these roads, but I thought a lot before traveling at night again, after what happened to me. I was on my way to see my parents. I left around 9 p.m., which is my favorite time to start traveling because the traffic is very calm. But when I was already on the road, in the middle of nowhere where there were flatlands instead of mountains, I decided to stop to relieve myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I parked my motorcycle on the side of the road and went into the brush. While I was doing my business, I heard footsteps treading on the branches, and some grasses were moving, being manipulated by something coming through them. I hurried to get back to my motorcycle, but when I looked up, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Among the branches, the head of a black goat with very red eyes was peeking out, and it seemed to be smiling. I didn't know what to do. I stood there stunned for a few seconds because I thought that if I moved, that animal would chase me, and that was the last thing I wanted. So I started to take very short and slow steps backward without turning my body, always keeping my eyes on that animal or whatever that thing was. As I did this, the goat began to stand up on 2 legs. This really happened, and I can't explain the terror I felt seeing that. I stopped for a moment and ceased stepping backward because I knew that thing didn't like what I was doing. It was so imposing that I really felt lost, cornered, and without escape. I knew very well that it wasn't a simple goat, not only because of its horrible and unusual appearance, but because it started to walk on 2 legs. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't bear the terror, and I decided to run as fast as my legs would allow towards my motorcycle. But as I did so, that animal began to make an endless series of horrible noises and moans, and I started to scream for help purely out of instinct, even though I knew there was no one around, not even passing cars. I was completely alone in the darkness of that brush, and I knew perfectly well that if that thing caught me and took me away, no one would ever know. I had to fight to get out of there alive. I ran and got on my motorcycle as best as I could while that thing moaned, and I could hear its loud footsteps running behind me. I finally started the motorcycle, but as I drove, I noticed that the animal was running alongside me in the brush. But its eyes and sinister smile were the most prominent features, as if it was telling me with its face that it was going to catch me. I don't know how I managed to keep driving. Maybe it was the adrenaline I felt at that moment until I finally saw a truck coming from the opposite direction. It was a double-trailer truck. When the truck passed me, and I could look towards the brush, that thing had disappeared. I don't know what drove it away or why it vanished and let me go, but I thanked God and life because I had already considered myself dead. I arrived at my parents' house, hugging them because I thought I would never see them again. I told them what had happened, fearful that they wouldn't believe me, but I had to tell them. I needed to vent and let them know why I had arrived in such a state. I told them that they didn't have to believe me, but I had to vent. My father stopped me and said that they did believe me. He also said that the body of that animal had probably been taken over by a demon because, in those places, criminal gangs perform many rituals for protection. He said that maybe that demon had taken the body of that goat to manifest itself, and that's why I had seen it that way. The truth is, I was shocked just thinking that a demon had appeared to me in the middle of nowhere and had chased me. Who knows what would have happened to me if it had caught me? It's something I'll never know, but I'm alive to tell the tale, and I wanted to share it with more people who might have experienced or seen similar things, to let them know they are not alone. There are more people who have had the misfortune of seeing those unforgettable things because I still see that goat, or whatever that thing was, in my nightmares.